A lonely cowboy lived in silence for years until a native beauty arrived, saying, "I've nowhere to go." Clayton Hayes lived on the edge of the wide Wyoming plains, far from the nearest town. His small ranch was surrounded by rolling fields of grass that swayed in the wind, and the mountains in the distance looked like silent giants watching over him. He had lived there for many years, and most people in the nearby town knew only a little about him. To them, he was a quiet man who kept to himself. Some even said he was strange, a cowboy who didn't belong anywhere but the land he owned. But Clayton didn't mind. He had learned to enjoy his own company, and the open skies and endless fields were enough to keep his thoughts company. Each morning, Clayton woke before the sun rose. The cold wind often greeted him as he stepped outside, but he had long since grown used to it. He fed the horses first, checking each stall to make sure his animals were safe and healthy. He liked the routine. There was a rhythm in his work that made him feel grounded. He would brush the horses, give them fresh hay, and make sure the water troughs were full. Sometimes he would talk to the animals quietly, even though he rarely spoke to another person. "Morning, Daisy," he would murmur to a mare he had raised from a foal. "You're looking strong today." The horse would nuzzle his hand, and Clayton would smile. That small connection, even with an animal, made the long days feel lighter. After tending to the horses, he would head out to check the fences. The wind often whipped across the plains, carrying dust and the faint smell of grass and wildflowers. Clayton walked for hours sometimes, fixing broken boards, tightening loose wires, and marking areas where the cattle grazed. The work was hard, but it was honest. There was satisfaction in knowing that his land was cared for, even if no one else ever saw it. By the time the sun was high in the sky, Clayton would pause for a brief rest. He liked to sit on the porch of his small wooden house, sipping strong coffee and looking out over the fields. The world felt quiet here, and he liked it that way. Evenings were the longest and the loneliest. After feeding the cattle and making sure the barn was secure, Clayton would prepare a simple meal, usually beans, bread, and whatever vegetables he had grown in his small garden. He ate alone at a rough wooden table, the wind sometimes whistling through the cracks in the cabin walls. After dinner, he would sit by the fire reading a book or simply staring into the flames. He didn't need much conversation. The crackling of the fire and the occasional hoot of an owl outside were company enough. But sometimes, late at night, a thought would creep in, a memory of someone he had loved and lost long ago. Clayton would shake his head and tell himself that the past was gone and that he had no one to blame but himself for keeping so far away from the world. Still, the ache of loneliness would linger, quiet but persistent. Clayton's life had not always been so solitary. Years before, he had a family, a life filled with laughter and companionship. But fate had a way of changing things, and he had lost his parents in a sudden accident when he was in his late 20s. After that, he tried to connect with people in town, but grief had made him wary. Friendships faded, and the bonds he had once valued seemed fragile and temporary. The world felt too noisy, too unpredictable, and the only place he could truly find peace was out here, among the hills and the endless sky. The solitude was not just comfort, it was a shield. He built his life around it, brick by brick, fence post by fence post, until it became almost second nature to live without anyone else around. Despite this, Clayton was not bitter. He had a deep respect for life and nature. He noticed the smallest changes in the environment, the first green shoots of spring, the way a hawk circled in the sky, or the way the light hit the mountains at dawn. He felt alive in these moments, more connected to the earth than to people. Sometimes he would ride his horse for miles without a plan, feeling the wind in his face and the rhythm of the hooves beneath him. These rides were more than work. They were meditation, a chance to clear his mind and forget the loneliness for a while. He could feel freedom in the open plains, a sense that even though he was alone, he was exactly where he belonged. At times, Clayton would think about the town, about the people who might wonder what he did all day, or why he didn't marry or settle down. But he never cared much for gossip or opinions. The townspeople saw only what he let them see: a solitary cowboy tending his land and disappearing when the sun set. They didn't know the depth of his thoughts, the memories he carried, or the quiet longing for someone to share his life with, even if he would never admit it aloud. There was a part of him that wanted companionship, yes, but he had grown cautious. Trust was not easy for someone who had been hurt and left alone for so long. Still, life had its small joys. He loved the animals on his ranch, the horses, the cattle, even the stray cats that sometimes wandered near his cabin. He loved the sunsets when the sky would turn pink and orange, reflecting on the land in a way that made it seem magical. He loved the quiet moments, the ones when he could feel the world breathe around him and remember that he was part of it. These moments reminded him that solitude did not have to mean sadness. It could be peace. It could be strength. It could be a life carefully lived, with attention to every detail and respect for the rhythm of the land. Yet no matter how content he seemed, there was always a small emptiness. Sometimes, as he lay in bed at night listening to the wind outside, he would imagine what it would be like to have someone there, someone to share the quiet and the work, someone whose laughter would echo through the rooms of his cabin. He would close his eyes and picture a face, a voice, a presence. Then he would tell himself that dreams were just that, dreams. Out here in this wide and lonely world, he was safe alone, and no one could hurt him again. That thought had kept him alive and strong, though it could not completely fill the hollow space in his heart. Despite all this, Clayton never stopped noticing life. He watched the seasons change with careful eyes, observing how the grass grew taller in spring, how the leaves turned golden in autumn, and how the snow covered the plains in winter. He felt a strange connection to these cycles, as if nature itself was his companion. Birds, rabbits, foxes, even the occasional deer, they were all part of his world, and he treated them with respect. He understood life in a way that few people did, but it was a quiet understanding, one that did not require conversation or approval. It was enough for him to live in harmony with the land, to respect it, and to find comfort in its constancy. And yet, even in this peaceful routine, Clayton's life was about to change. He could not know it, of course, but the world beyond the plains was moving in ways he could not predict. One day, something, or someone, would arrive that would challenge the quiet, steady rhythm he had built for himself. It would be unexpected, startling, and perhaps even frightening. But Clayton Hayes, who had lived in silence for so many years, would soon discover that his solitude, no matter how deep, could not shield him from the call of the human heart. And when that day came, everything he had known about his life would begin to shift, slowly, like the wind reshaping the hills, until there was no turning back. Clayton was repairing a fence near the edge of his property one late afternoon when he noticed movement out of the corner of his eye. At first he thought it was a deer, maybe a fox, moving quickly through the tall grass. But then he saw her, a young woman, small and thin, her clothes soaked and clinging to her. She stumbled along uneven ground, her face pale and her eyes wide with exhaustion. Clayton's first instinct was caution. He had lived alone for so many years that strangers made him uneasy. He had learned that the world could be unpredictable, and while he wanted to be kind, he also had to protect himself. The woman did not speak at first, She looked as if she had been traveling for a long time, carrying a small bundle of possessions wrapped in cloth. Her dark hair hung in wet strands across her face, and Clayton could see that she was shivering. He called out gently, keeping his voice calm. "Hey there, are you all right?" He didn't want to startle her. She looked up, her eyes meeting his, and for a moment she seemed frozen in place, as if she had not expected anyone to be nearby. I have nowhere to go," she said finally, her voice soft and barely above a whisper. It was strange, Clayton thought, to hear such honesty from someone he had never met. Most people would give excuses, ask for money, or try to hide their troubles. But she simply said the truth. He could see it in her eyes, fear, exhaustion, and a quiet hope that maybe, just maybe, someone would help her. Clayton considered his options. His ranch was small and remote, but he had enough food, shelter, and warmth to offer her for the night. He could not leave her out in the cold, not when she looked so fragile and tired. He gestured toward his cabin. "Come on," he said. "You can stay here until you feel better." She hesitated, looking around as if to be sure this offer was real. Then, slowly, she nodded and followed him. The walk to the cabin was short but tense. Clayton noticed every detail. The way her feet dragged slightly through the mud, the way she clutched her bundle tightly, as if letting it go would mean losing her past. She seemed wary, but she also seemed to trust him in some way. When they reached the cabin, Clayton opened the door and motioned for her to come inside. The warmth of the small stove hit her immediately, and she let out a shiver as she stepped onto the wooden floor. "Sit by the fire," Clayton said. He pulled a chair close to the flames for her, and she sank into it, looking almost relieved to finally rest. Clayton went to the kitchen and brought over a mug of warm water, then a bowl of simple stew he had prepared for dinner. He set them in front of her. "You must be hungry," he said. She nodded, taking the spoon slowly, as if afraid that being fed might be too much to accept at once. They ate in silence at first. Clayton kept glancing at her, curious about her story, but not wanting to push. After a few minutes, she finally spoke, her voice low but steady. "My name is Ayana," she said. I didn't know where to go, and then I saw your house. I thought maybe I could stay here." Clayton nodded, accepting the truth in her words. There was no exaggeration, no pleading, just honesty. It reminded him of a time when he had been younger, before life had made him cautious, when he had simply trusted people without hesitation. "You can stay," Clayton said. "You don't have to worry about anything tonight. I'll get you dry clothes and a blanket." Ayana's shoulders relaxed slightly, and for the first time since he had seen her, Clayton noticed a small, grateful smile. It was fleeting, but it was there, and it reminded him that even small gestures of kindness could mean a great deal to someone. He went to the spare room and gathered a few clean clothes. They were simple. Cotton shirt, worn jeans, but they were dry and warm. He brought them back, along with a thick blanket. "Here," he said, handing them to her. "You'll feel better once you're dry." She took them carefully, nodding her thanks. I really appreciate it," she said softly. Clayton didn't answer, but he felt a warmth in his chest he hadn't felt in years. It was strange to feel a connection to someone so quickly, but he knew instinctively that this was important. As the storm outside raged on, they sat together by the fire. The wind howled through the cracks in the cabin walls, and rain pelted the roof, but inside there was warmth, light, and a quiet sense of safety. Ayana told a little about her journey, though she kept much of it vague. She had left her home for reasons she did not fully explain, but Clayton could tell that she had endured hardship. She spoke of traveling through forests and plains, of nights spent sleeping under the stars, and of days when she had not eaten enough. Her voice was calm, but there was an undercurrent of pain that Clayton could sense immediately. Clayton listened without interruption, occasionally nodding, occasionally offering a comforting word. "You're safe here," he said finally. "No one will harm you." Ayana's eyes met his, and he saw a mixture of relief and surprise. She had expected danger, perhaps, but not kindness. She had expected suspicion, perhaps, but not acceptance. Clayton realized that this simple act, offering someone shelter, was changing both of them in ways neither could predict. Over the next few hours, Clayton helped her dry off completely and settle into a small bed in the corner of the cabin. He brought her a cup of tea and sat nearby while she drank it, making sure she was comfortable. She seemed tired beyond measure, and he knew she needed rest more than anything else. As she finally lay down and closed her eyes, Clayton felt a quiet sense of satisfaction. He had done something good, something meaningful, and it reminded him that even after years of solitude, life could still surprise him. The next morning, Ayana awoke to the smell of breakfast cooking. Clayton had prepared eggs and toast, simple food but nourishing. She looked around the cabin, noticing the careful organization, the cleanliness, and the way everything seemed to have a place. There was pride in the way he cared for his home, a reflection of the man he was, quiet, responsible, and dependable. She felt a strange comfort in being here, and knowing that someone cared enough to provide her with shelter and food without asking anything in return. As they ate, Clayton asked her gently, "Do you have anywhere else to go?" Ayana shook her head. "No," she said simply, "I don't." There was honesty in her words, and Clayton felt a mix of emotions: concern, compassion, and a sense of responsibility. He realized that her presence was already beginning to change the rhythm of his life. He would have to think about the future, about what it meant to have someone living on the ranch, about how he would protect her and give her a safe place. It was a new challenge, but one that he did not feel afraid to face. Over the following days, Ayana began to help around the ranch. She was quick to learn, moving with care and attention. She helped feed the horses, gather eggs, and clean the barn. She asked questions about the work, showing curiosity and a willingness to learn. Clayton found himself impressed by her determination and her strength. She was not just a visitor. She was becoming a part of the ranch, a part of his life. And for the first time in years, Clayton felt a spark of something he thought he had lost: hope. They shared quiet conversations in the evenings, talking about the sky, the land, and small moments from their pasts. Clayton learned that Ayana had a kind heart, a sharp mind, and a resilience that reminded him of the strength he admired in people who could face life's difficulties without losing hope. And though they had only just met, there was a sense of companionship growing between them, a connection that was slow but steady, built on trust, kindness, and shared silence. Clayton had spent years alone, thinking that silence was all he needed. But now, with Ayana in his home, he realized that life could be richer with another person by his side. It was not love yet, not in the way stories spoke of it, but it was something equally powerful: the beginning of trust, friendship, and the possibility of something new. And for the first time in a long time, Clayton did not feel the emptiness he had grown so accustomed to. Instead, he felt curiosity, hope, and a quiet thrill of change. As the storm cleared outside and the sun began to rise, Clayton and Ayana stood together on the porch, watching the plains stretch out before them. The land was still vast and empty, but now it seemed different. There was a sense of possibility in the air, a feeling that life had more to offer than work and solitude. Clayton knew that challenges lay ahead, that trust would need to grow, and that both of them had scars from the past. But for now, in this quiet morning light, they were safe. They were together, and in that moment, that was enough. Days passed, and life on the ranch began to settle into a new rhythm. Ayana had grown accustomed to waking before dawn, helping Clayton with chores, and learning the ways of ranch life. She had a natural ease with animals, and Clayton watched with quiet admiration as she guided the horses, her hands steady and her voice soft yet firm. The horses seemed to respond to her as they did to him, a silent acknowledgement of her patience and care. Watching her, Clayton felt something he hadn't realized he missed, a sense of shared purpose. The two of them worked side by side, and slowly, the silence between them became comfortable rather than heavy. Clayton had spent so many years alone that he sometimes forgot how to talk to another person without the weight of caution pressing on every word. But with Ayana, conversation felt natural. They spoke about the weather, the changing seasons, and small stories from the past, though neither shared too much at first. Their words were simple, but the tone carried warmth, and the silence in between was no longer empty. It was a space of understanding. One morning, Clayton decided to take Ayana on a ride across the plains. The sky was wide and clear, the sunlight scattering across the fields in golden hues. He mounted his horse first, holding out a hand to help her climb onto the second horse. At first, she was nervous, gripping the reins tightly, but he guided her patiently. "Just feel the horse beneath you," he said quietly. "Let it move with you." Slowly she relaxed, leaning slightly into the rhythm of the animal. Clayton smiled to himself. She had courage, a quiet strength that impressed him more than words ever could. They rode for miles, following the paths Clayton knew so well. The plains stretched endlessly around them, dotted with wildflowers and the occasional cluster of trees. Ayana laughed when a breeze swept across her face, and Clayton felt a strange warmth in his chest he hadn't felt in years. It was not love, not yet, but it was something close. The joy of companionship, of shared experiences that brought color to a life that had been mostly gray. They spoke little, but that was fine. Words were not always necessary to feel connected. Back at the ranch, they continued their work, tackling small projects together. Clayton showed her how to mend a fence properly, how to check the water troughs for cleanliness, and how to tend to the garden with patience and care. Ayana absorbed each lesson eagerly, asking questions when she didn't understand and trying again when she made mistakes. Clayton's pride in her grew quietly. He could see her determination and intelligence, her willingness to work hard without complaint. It reminded him of the kind of person he admired most, someone resilient and kind, capable of facing challenges without losing hope. In the evenings, they would sit by the fire, sharing a simple meal of bread, soup, or eggs. Conversation deepened gradually, moving from small talk to stories about childhood and dreams. Ayana told him about the places she had traveled, about the forests and rivers she had seen, and the towns she had passed through. Clayton listened closely, fascinated by her experiences, feeling a connection to a world beyond the plains he had always called home. He told her small stories too, about his parents, about the ranch when he first inherited it, and about the times he had been happiest. It was a slow process, this sharing of life, but it brought them closer together, building trust like bricks laid carefully in a wall. One afternoon, as they worked in the barn, Ayana paused to rest, wiping sweat from her brow. Clayton watched her, noticing the way her dark hair fell across her face and the intensity in her eyes even in quiet moments. She caught him staring and smiled shyly. "You watch too much," she teased lightly. Clayton chuckled, a sound he rarely allowed himself to make. I'm just noticing, he said. You work hard. It's admirable. She laughed again, and it was soft and genuine, filling the barn with a lightness Clayton had not heard in years. For a moment, he felt something he hadn't allowed himself to feel, the possibility of joy shared with another person. As the days turned into weeks, their bond deepened. Ayana began to understand the subtle rhythms of the land, reading the sky for weather changes, knowing when the cattle needed to be moved, and learning the habits of the horses. Clayton watched with quiet satisfaction as she grew confident, taking initiative in ways that surprised him. She was not a stranger anymore. She was becoming part of the ranch, part of the life he had built. And he was learning, slowly but surely, how to share his space, his routines, and even his heart with someone else. One evening, after a long day of work, Clayton and Ayana walked together to a small hill on the edge of the property. The sun was setting, casting a golden glow across the plains. The wind was gentle, carrying the scent of grass and wildflowers. They stood side by side, watching the colors change, feeling the quiet peace that only a place like this could bring. Ayana leaned slightly on his shoulder, and Clayton felt the weight of the years he had spent alone. He realized that these small, shared moments were what life had been missing. It was not grand gestures or excitement, but the simple act of being together, of sharing space and silence, that mattered most. I never imagined it could be like this, Ayana said softly, her voice almost lost in the wind. Clayton looked at her, curious. Like what? He asked. Like having someone care for you even when you don't ask for it, she said. Like feeling safe somewhere after so long of not having a home. Clayton nodded slowly, understanding the truth in her words. He felt the same way, though he had never admitted it to anyone before. The ranch had been his refuge, but now, with her here, it felt alive in a new way. Their days became filled with small joys, gathering eggs from the chickens, feeding the horses, and tending to the garden together. They shared stories, dreams, and quiet laughter. Ayana taught Clayton small things too. How to notice the birds' songs in the morning, how to recognize patterns in the clouds, and even how to cook simple meals in ways that added warmth and flavor. Clayton had always managed on his own, but he found himself appreciating her presence more than he expected. She brought color to his life, a lightness he had forgotten existed. Trust continued to grow between them. Clayton found himself sharing more about his past, telling her about his parents, his childhood, and the heartbreaks that had led him to this solitary life. Ayana listened without judgment, offering understanding and gentle encouragement. She spoke of her own journey, of the challenges she had faced, and of the hope she carried despite uncertainty. Their conversations were honest, quiet, and meaningful, a sharp contrast to the empty silences that had once dominated Clayton's life. One afternoon, as a sudden rainstorm swept across the plains, they worked together to secure the cattle in the barn. The storm was fierce, the wind shaking the structure, but they moved with calm efficiency, their hands working in tandem. Clayton watched Ayana's focus and courage, and he realized that he was no longer the only one protecting the ranch. She had become a partner, someone who could face challenges alongside him. It was a new feeling, one that brought both relief and a quiet happiness he had not thought possible. As the storm passed and the skies cleared, they stood outside, looking at the rainbow stretching across the horizon. Clayton felt a sense of peace, a feeling that life was beginning to take on a new shape. He looked at Ayana, noticing her bright eyes and the way the sunlight highlighted her hair. She smiled at him, and in that moment he understood that their connection was more than friendship. It was trust, respect, and the possibility of something deeper. though neither of them spoke it aloud. That night, as they sat by the fire, Ayana brought out a small notebook she had carried with her. She showed him sketches of the places she had been, drawings of landscapes, animals, and small scenes from her journey. Clayton admired the detail and care she had put into them. "You have a gift," he said quietly. "You see the world in a way I never have." She smiled, and for the first time he felt that their meeting had been meant to be, not by fate, but by timing, by the quiet way life sometimes brings people together when they are ready. Clayton realized that having Ayana in his life had changed him. He was no longer just a solitary man living in routine. He was a man who could care, trust, and share. He understood that life on the ranch was richer now, that his world had expanded beyond the boundaries of fences and fields. And though challenges would come, he felt ready to face them, not alone, but with someone who had become a part of his life, someone who mattered deeply. As they prepared for bed that night, Clayton noticed the quiet way Ayana moved through the cabin, arranging her things and settling in. There was a sense of belonging in the air, a feeling that home was not just a place but a shared experience. He smiled to himself, realizing that the loneliness he had carried for so long was finally beginning to lift. And in the warmth of the cabin, with the wind whispering outside, Clayton Hayes and Ayana shared the beginnings of a bond that would grow stronger with each passing day, a bond built on trust, respect, and the quiet joy of companionship. Weeks passed, and life on the ranch had grown comfortable for both Clayton and Ayana. They had learned each other's habits, their small routines, and even the quiet glances that carried meaning without words. The ranch, which had once been a place of solitude for Clayton, now felt alive with movement, laughter, and shared purpose. But even as they settled into their new rhythm, Clayton could sense the tension building quietly in the distance. Life outside the ranch had not forgotten Ayana, and the world beyond the plains was starting to make its presence known. It began one morning when Clayton rode into the nearby town to gather supplies. He hadn't been there in months, and the townspeople noticed immediately that he was accompanied by Ayana. Whispers followed him down the main street. People stared at her, curious, unsure, and sometimes judgmental. Clayton felt a flicker of irritation but tried to ignore it. He knew that the town's curiosity could not be avoided, but he also knew that he had to protect Ayana from the whispers and questions she was not ready to answer. As he gathered food, tools, and other necessities, he overheard people asking questions. "Who is that with him? Where did she come from? Do you think she belongs here?" Clayton kept his face calm, replying politely but without detail. Ayana stayed close by, quiet but observant, sensing the unspoken tension. She had been cautious all her life, and the subtle curiosity, even suspicion of the townspeople, reminded her of why she had traveled so far to find safety. She leaned slightly toward Clayton, and he understood without words. She trusted him, and he needed to protect that trust. Returning to the ranch, Clayton's mind was heavy. He had grown used to life on his land without interference, without judgment. Now, the outside world threatened to intrude on the sanctuary he had built. He knew that he had to talk to Ayana about it, to prepare her for the reality that life outside the ranch might not be as welcoming. That evening, as they sat together by the fire, he spoke carefully. "People will talk," he said quietly. "You may hear things, questions you don't want to answer. You need to know that it's not a reflection on you. It's just how the world works sometimes." Ayana listened, her dark eyes thoughtful. "I understand," she said. "I've been used to it. I've learned to move quietly, to keep my head down. But it feels different here. I feel safe, and I don't want that to change." Clayton nodded, feeling the weight of her words. He admired her courage, and her honesty. It was rare to meet someone who faced life's difficulties without bitterness, who could speak truthfully about fear and hope at the same time. He realized that the bond between them was becoming stronger, not just because of shared work, but because of trust and understanding. The days following were marked by small challenges. A neighboring rancher stopped by, curious about the newcomer. Clayton welcomed him politely, offering food and tea. But the conversation soon turned to questions about Ayana's past. Clayton kept his answers brief, protecting her privacy, but he could see the unease in Ayana's face. She looked at him with gratitude, but also a hint of worry. Clayton realized that life outside the ranch would always pose questions, some innocent, some not, and that their bond would be tested by how they faced these moments together. One afternoon, while tending to the garden, Ayana spoke of her fears quietly. "Sometimes I worry that I don't belong anywhere," she admitted, pulling weeds with careful hands. "Even here, I wonder if one day I'll have to leave. People might not understand me, or they might judge me." Clayton paused, watching her work. He had seen courage in her before, but now he saw vulnerability too, and it stirred something deep within him. He reached out and placed a hand gently on hers. "You belong here," he said softly. "Not because of what anyone else thinks, but because this is where you are safe, and this is where I want you to be. I won't let anything change that." The bond between them strengthened further as they shared evenings discussing life and dreams. Ayana told Clayton about the people she had met during her travels, about the kindnesses and hardships she had encountered. Clayton listened carefully, offering insight and comfort when needed. He shared stories of his parents, of the time he had first inherited the ranch, and of the loneliness that had followed. These exchanges deepened their understanding of each other, turning friendship into something more meaningful. The quiet moments, the shared laughter, and the small acts of care wove a tapestry of connection between them that neither had expected, but both had come to cherish. Despite their growing closeness, challenges continued to test their relationship. One afternoon, a sudden storm approached while they were out checking the cattle. The wind picked up quickly, tossing branches and dust into the air. The cattle became restless, and Clayton felt the familiar pull of responsibility. He and Ayana worked together to herd the animals into the barn, shouting directions over the roar of the wind. Ayana moved with confidence, guiding the cattle alongside him, and Clayton felt a surge of pride. She was strong, brave, and reliable, a true partner in every sense. Later that evening, after the storm passed, they sat by the fire, exhausted but satisfied. "You handled yourself well today," Clayton said, breaking the silence. Ayana smiled, but there was a hint of concern in her eyes. "I was scared," she admitted, "but having you there made all the difference. I trust you." Clayton looked at her, realizing that their trust was mutual, built on action and care rather than mere words. He felt the beginnings of a deeper connection, one that neither of them could ignore. As the weeks went by, the threat of judgment from the outside world loomed quietly, but Clayton and Ayana faced it together. Clayton became more protective, not in a controlling way, but in a way that ensured she felt safe. He noticed how she watched for signs of discomfort from others, how she adjusted her behavior to avoid unnecessary attention. And yet, she never complained. Instead, she focused on the ranch, the animals, and their shared work. Clayton admired her resilience, her ability to face uncertainty with courage and grace. One evening, as they walked along the edge of the property, Ayana stopped and looked out over the plains. The sunset painted the sky in shades of gold and pink. She took a deep breath and said softly, "I'm glad I found this place. I'm glad I found you." Clayton felt a lump in his throat, emotions he had kept buried for years surfacing quietly. He didn't know if he could say exactly what he felt, but he understood the truth in her words. She had become more than a companion. She had become a part of his life in a way that no one else ever had. Their trust and connection were tested further when a small problem arose with the neighboring rancher, who questioned Clayton about Ayana's presence. Clayton handled it calmly, speaking with patience and firmness. He made it clear that she was safe on his land and that he would not tolerate unnecessary interference. Ayana observed silently, learning from his quiet strength. She realized that Clayton was not just kind, he was steadfast, someone who would protect what mattered to him without fear or hesitation. It was a lesson she would carry with her for the rest of their time together. Through all these challenges, Clayton noticed subtle changes in himself. He was more open, more willing to share his thoughts and feelings. He laughed more easily, spoke with more warmth, and even allowed himself to hope. Ayana's presence had shifted the quiet rhythm of his life, introducing uncertainty but also joy. He found that he was beginning to imagine a future beyond solitude, a life where trust, care, and companionship could flourish. And though fear lingered, fear of loss, of judgment, of mistakes, he felt stronger facing it with Ayana by his side. One night, after a long day of work, they sat by the fire, and Ayana spoke quietly. "Do you think we can really make this work?" she asked, her eyes reflecting the flames. Clayton looked at her and smiled, though it was tinged with seriousness. "It won't always be easy," he said. "The world outside might challenge us. Life has a way of testing people. But yes, I believe we can." Together, she nodded, and for the first time in months, she allowed herself to fully relax, trusting not just the safety of the ranch, but the strength of their growing bond. And so, life on the ranch continued, filled with work, learning, laughter, and small trials. The outside world remained a distant presence, sometimes threatening, sometimes curious, but Clayton and Ayana faced it together. Each challenge strengthened their trust, deepened their understanding, and brought them closer. The days were long, the work hard, but the quiet satisfaction of companionship, shared responsibility, and mutual care filled the spaces that loneliness had once occupied. They were no longer two separate lives intersecting. They were becoming a life shared step by step, day by day, storm by storm. Clayton had spent years alone, believing that solitude was the only way to protect his heart. Now, with Ayana by his side, he realized that trust and care were stronger than fear. And Ayana, who had wandered through the world seeking safety, had found a home, not just in the ranch, but in the quiet strength and warmth of Clayton Hayes. Together, they faced the challenges that came, knowing that no matter what the outside world thought, they had each other. And in that bond, fragile yet powerful, they discovered the possibility of a future neither had imagined, but both now dared to hope for. The weeks turned into months, and life on the ranch had settled into a rhythm that Clayton and Ayana both cherished. The early days of uncertainty and hesitation had passed, replaced by mutual trust and shared purpose. The ranch was no longer just a place of work for Clayton. It had become a home filled with warmth, laughter, and a sense of belonging. Ayana had grown confident in her duties, and Clayton had grown more open in his heart. Together, they moved as a team, anticipating each other's needs, sharing the burdens of daily life, and quietly celebrating the small victories that made the ranch thrive. One morning, as the sun rose over the plains, painting the sky in shades of orange and pink, Clayton and Ayana saddled their horses for a long ride. The air was crisp, carrying the scent of wildflowers and the faint aroma of earth after a light morning rain. They rode side by side, their horses stepping in rhythm across the soft ground. Clayton looked at Ayanna, noticing the way her hair caught the sunlight and how her eyes reflected the beauty of the land around them. He felt a deep appreciation, not just for her presence, but for the way she had quietly transformed his life. As they rode, Ayanna spoke softly, sharing her thoughts about the future. "Do you ever think about what life might be like if we stayed together like this?" she asked. Clayton smiled gently, considering the question. "I do," he admitted. "I used to think I would always be alone, that this land was all I needed. But now, I see that life is richer when it is shared. I can't imagine doing this without you." Ayanna reached out, brushing her hand against his arm. It was a simple gesture, but it carried the weight of trust, comfort, and the beginning of love. Clayton felt warmth spread through him, a feeling he had not allowed himself to experience in years. Returning to the ranch, they spent the day tending to the garden, checking on the cattle, and repairing a fence along the northern boundary. Their work was steady, the kind that required attention and care but also offered satisfaction at the end of the day. Ayanna moved with confidence now, understanding the rhythms of the ranch and anticipating what needed to be done. Clayton watched her closely, silently admiring her intelligence, determination, and the gentle way she cared for every creature on the land. She had become indispensable, not just in work but in spirit. That evening, after a long day of labor, they sat together on the porch of the cabin, watching the sun dip below the horizon. The sky was painted in deep shades of red and gold, and the wind carried a quiet stillness across the plains. Ayanna leaned slightly against Clayton, and he felt a sense of peace he had never known in his years of solitude. "It's beautiful," she whispered. "It feels like the world belongs to us here." Clayton nodded, feeling the truth in her words. This place, this life, had become something more than survival. It had become a home, a sanctuary, and a space where two hearts could grow together. As the days went on, their bond continued to strengthen. They shared stories, laughter, and quiet moments of reflection. Clayton taught Ayanna how to track the weather, understand the habits of the animals, and noticed the subtle signs of the changing seasons. She, in turn, shared her creativity, drawing sketches of the ranch, painting small watercolors of the landscapes, and even helping to plan improvements to the garden and barn. Their collaboration was seamless, each one complementing the other's strengths, and both learning from each other in ways that deepened their connection. Despite the comfort of their routine, challenges still arose. Occasionally, the townspeople's curiosity resurfaced, or small conflicts with neighboring ranchers needed attention, but Clayton and Ayanna faced each situation together, with calm and confidence. Clayton noticed that he no longer felt the same fear of judgment he once carried. With Ayanna by his side, he felt capable of standing firm, protecting their life and their home with quiet strength. And Ayanna, who had once been wary of the world, learned to trust not just him, but in the stability they had created together. One particularly memorable afternoon, a calf had wandered too far from the herd, and Clayton and Ayanna had to work quickly to bring it back. They moved with practiced coordination, calling to the animals, guiding them gently, and using their voices and hands in perfect harmony. When the calf was safely returned, Ayanna laughed, a sound full of relief and joy. Clayton smiled at her, feeling a rush of pride and affection. Moments like these, though small, reminded him of how much life had changed since her arrival. The ranch was no longer a place of silence. It was filled with shared victories, laughter, and companionship. In the evenings, they often sat by the fire, talking about dreams for the future. Ayana spoke of wanting to create a garden full of flowers and vegetables, a space where wildlife could thrive alongside the crops. Clayton listened, offering suggestions and helping her plan. They discussed improvements to the barn and the house, ways to make life easier and more comfortable for both of them. These conversations, practical and imaginative, were also deeply personal. They reflected a life being built together, a shared vision that had grown from trust, care, and respect. One night, after finishing their chores, they stepped outside to admire the stars. The sky was clear and endless, and the Milky Way stretched across the darkness like a river of light. And Clayton pointed out constellations, explaining the stories he had learned as a boy from his parents. Ayana listened intently, her hand finding his as they stood together in quiet wonder. In that stillness, with the vast plains surrounding them and the stars above, they felt the strength of their connection. Words were not necessary. The moment itself spoke of belonging, safety, and the quiet magic of shared life. As time went on, the ranch flourished under their combined care. The cattle were healthy, the garden thrived, and the cabin, once simple and sparse, had become a welcoming home filled with warmth and small touches of personality. Ayana had added her creativity and care, planting flowers along the paths, sketching and painting the landscapes, and filling the home with small details that reflected her presence. Clayton noticed every detail, appreciating not just the work she did, but the thought and love she put into it. It was a clear sign that she had made this place her own, just as it had become a part of him. One evening, after a long day, Ayana sat beside Clayton on the porch and spoke quietly. "I never thought I'd find a place like this," she said. "Somewhere I can feel safe, valued, and happy." Clayton looked at her, noticing the sincerity in her eyes. "You deserve it," he replied softly. "And I'm glad you're here, more than you can imagine." She smiled, leaning slightly into him, and for a moment the years of hardship, loneliness, and uncertainty seemed far away. In their place was a shared sense of belonging, a life built together on trust, care, and love that had grown slowly but steadily. The final test of their bond came unexpectedly. A traveler arrived in town, speaking of opportunities elsewhere, of jobs and places that might seem tempting. Ayana listened politely but felt a pull in her heart toward the ranch and Clayton. Clayton noticed the hesitation in her eyes and understood immediately. He did not try to persuade or pressure her. Instead, he simply said, "Whatever you choose, I'll support you. But if your heart belongs here, so does mine." The honesty and patience in his words reflected the depth of trust and respect that had grown between them. Ayana realized that her choice was clear. She had found her home, not just in the land, but in the life they had built together. The days that followed were quiet, yet full of meaning. They worked together, laughed together, and planned for the future. Their partnership was no longer tentative. It was a bond built on shared experience, mutual respect, and deep care. Clayton had learned to trust again, to open his heart, and to see that life could offer joy even after years of solitude. Ayana had found a place where she belonged, a home where she could be safe, valued, and appreciated for who she was. In the end, life on the ranch was more than work. It was a celebration of connection, love, and shared purpose. Clayton and Ayana had faced challenges, uncertainty, and the lingering presence of the outside world, but together they had built a life that was strong, steady, and full of quiet happiness. They had discovered that trust and care could create a home, and that companionship, even after years of solitude, could bring meaning and joy. On a warm spring evening, as the sun set over the plains, Clayton and Ayanna rode side by side across the fields. The sky glowed in shades of pink and gold, the wind rustled the grass gently, and the world seemed to stretch endlessly before them. They rode without hurry, their hearts light, their spirits connected, knowing that they had found not just a place, but a life together. The ranch, the plains, and the quiet cabin were more than home. They were a testament to resilience, trust, and the power of companionship. As they returned to the cabin, Ayanna looked at Clayton and said softly, "I never thought I'd feel this way again." Clayton smiled, taking her hand in his. "Neither did I," he said, "but here we are together." And in that simple moment, surrounded by the land they loved and the life they had built, they understood that home was not just a place, but a bond, a shared journey, and a future they would face side by side. The years of loneliness had faded, replaced by a life of connection, warmth, and quiet joy, just as it was meant to be.